The distance grows. Sarah stood in front of the bathroom mirror, applying her lipstick with more care than usual. These days, she found herself doing that whenever she knew someone new would be visiting the house. Mark was away in Chicago for another one of his business trips, and she had started looking forward to these absences more than she cared to admit. The marriage between Sarah and Mark had always seemed like a fairy tale to their friends. They met in college at a coffee shop where Mark spilled an entire cappuccino on her white sweater, and instead of getting mad, she laughed until tears streamed down her face. They built a life together with intention and devotion. He became a successful marketing executive, and she became a real estate agent with her own thriving business. They bought the beautiful colonial house on Maple Street with white shutters and a wraparound porch that they had always dreamed of. But somewhere between the mortgage payments and the late nights working from home, something had shifted. Sarah could not pinpoint exactly when the distance began. It crept in slowly, like a shadow at dusk. One day, Mark would come home and she would feel that familiar flutter in her chest, and the next day his presence felt ordinary, almost suffocating in its ordinariness. Mark was a good man. Everyone said so. He was loyal and hardworking, and he had loved her with a consistency that some women dreamed of. But lately, when he looked at her, there was a question in his eyes, as if he was searching for someone he used to know. She could feel him noticing her absences, the way she suddenly had more late appointments, the way she dressed differently when she was going out, the way her phone buzzed with messages that made her smile in ways he no longer could. Today was different. Today was significant because David was coming over again. David was technically a contractor who had been helping them renovate the kitchen, but the renovations had been going on for 3 months now, and Mark had mentioned something about that at dinner last week. Sarah had quickly changed the subject and suggested they order Thai food instead. David was charming in a way that felt dangerous. He had dark eyes that seemed to understand her immediately, and he listened to her in a way Mark had stopped doing years ago. When David asked about her day, she felt seen. When David laughed at her jokes, the laughter felt genuine and electric. Sarah told herself nothing was happening, really nothing at all. It was just friendly conversation, just two people enjoying each other's company while working on a kitchen renovation. That was all it was. She heard his truck pull into the driveway and her heart jumped unexpectedly. She smoothed down her already smooth hair and took a breath. She would be professional and kind, just like always. The camera sees everything. Mark sat in his hotel room in Chicago staring at his laptop screen, trying to focus on the Henderson presentation, but his mind kept drifting back to Sarah. She had seemed distant on the phone this morning. When he had called her, she answered with that tone, the one that suggested she was busy or irritated, or both. He tried telling himself it was work stress. She had been showing more houses lately, pushing herself harder, but something gnawed at him, a feeling he could not quite name. He had installed the security camera system 6 months ago for safety reasons, or so he had told himself. They lived in a nice neighborhood, but she could never be too careful. That was what he said to Sarah when he set up the 4 cameras positioned at the front entrance, back door, garage, and the living room. She had not objected, which surprised him a little, but then again, Sarah seemed preoccupied with other things these days. That evening, Mark decided to check the camera feed from home. Something made him do it, a gut feeling, a whisper of intuition he could not ignore. He logged into the app and scrolled through the day's footage. Most of it was mundane. Sarah moving through the house in her afternoon. She had left around 2:30 for an appointment, or so she said. But then, at 3:15 she returned, and shortly after, the doorbell rang. The footage showed David arriving with his tool belt and confident smile. Sarah opened the door, and her entire face transformed. Eyes brightening. She was wearing that blue dress, the one Mark loved but she rarely wore anymore. They moved into the kitchen, and Mark watched as David began discussing the cabinet installation. But then, something shifted.
The conversation became less about work and more about everything else. Sarah was laughing, leaning against the counter, and David was standing very close. The distance between them seemed to shrink with each moment. His hand brushed her arm as he pointed at something. The touch lingered longer than necessary. Sarah did not move away. She did not seem uncomfortable. She seemed pleased. Her body language was open and inviting. Mark's chest tightened as he watched his wife from 800 miles away flirt with another man. The touches, the smiles, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous and trying to impress someone. He knew all her signs. He had memorized them over the years, and here they were on full display for David. He sat back in his hotel chair, feeling something crack inside him. This was not just harmless conversation. This was not friendly banter between professionals. This was an infidelity playing out on real time on his phone screen.
The confrontation. Mark drove home from the airport in complete silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The presentation in Chicago had been forgotten. He had made an excuse to his boss, a family emergency, which was technically true, though not in the way anyone would understand. He left early that night and caught the first flight back to Boston. His mind replayed the footage over and over. The touches, the smiles, the unmistakable chemistry that Sarah claimed did not exist. He had watched another hour of the camera feed before he could not bear to see any more. David had stayed for 2 hours, and the entire time Sarah had been someone Mark did not recognize. She was playful and flirtatious and entirely present in a way she had not been with Mark in months. When he arrived home, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She was humming, and she looked happy. She turned to see him, and her face shifted, surprise flashing across her features. It was not the good kind of surprise. It was the surprise of someone caught doing something they should not have been doing. Mark did not raise his voice. He had always prided himself on being rational and controlled even in difficult moments. So when he asked her to sit down, she complied without question. He opened the security camera app and turned the phone toward her. The video played silently, but the images spoke volumes. Sarah flirting, David leaning close, Sarah touching his arm. Sarah, eyes widening in shock, watching her own face light up in a way it had not for her husband in a very long time. For several seconds she said nothing. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Then she began to speak quickly, making excuses. Everything poured out in a desperate rush. It was nothing serious. David was just a friend. She had been stressed and he made her feel better. The touches meant nothing really. They were just being friendly and playful. Mark listened to every word and felt nothing but a hollow emptiness where his love used to live. When she finished, he simply asked her one question. Did she understand what she had done? Sarah began to cry, tears streaming down her face. She reached for him, but he pulled away. He told her that he understood everything perfectly. He understood that she had taken him for granted. He understood that she had chosen to betray him not once, but repeatedly. He understood that her lies were almost worse than her actions, because they suggested she thought he was foolish enough to believe them. Sarah sobbed and apologized and begged him to forgive her, but Mark had already made a decision in that hotel room when the footage first played. He stood up and walked to the bedroom to pack a bag. The silence that followed was deafening. The aftermath of choices. 3 weeks had passed since Mark left, and Sarah found herself in a state of complete dissolution. The beautiful house on Maple Street that they had dreamed about together now felt like a museum of dead memories. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but replay the moment Mark turned away from her. She had tried calling him countless times, but he never answered. His lawyer had sent her divorce papers, which sat on the kitchen counter unopened. She could not bring herself to acknowledge them, because acknowledging them meant accepting that everything was truly over. She had destroyed something precious and irreplaceable, and there was no way to glue it back together. David had called her twice after Mark left. The first time, she actually answered, thinking maybe he could fix this somehow. But when she heard his voice, something inside her recoiled. She realized with horrifying clarity that she did not actually care about him. She had been infatuated with the attention, the validation, the way he made her feel desired. But desire and love were not the same thing, and she had confused them so badly that she had burned her actual marriage to the ground. The second time he called, she did not answer. She never called him back. He eventually stopped trying. Sarah deleted his number from her phone, as if erasing him could somehow undo the damage she had done. Her mother came to visit her one afternoon, finding Sarah in bed at 3 p.m, still in her pajamas. Concern etched on her face. Her mother did not say, "I told you so," even though Sarah knew she had warned her about taking Mark for granted. She simply sat on the edge of the bed and held her daughter, while Sarah, crying uncontrollably, wept for what felt like the 100th time. Sarah tried to throw herself into work, taking on more and more real estate deals, hoping that exhaustion would numb the pain. But success felt hollow without anyone to share it with. She would close a major sale and want to call Mark to tell him, only to remember that she had forfeited the right to his pride in her accomplishments. She had forfeited so much. One evening, Sarah sat at the kitchen counter, looking at the renovated cabinets that David had installed. They looked beautiful, perfect even, but they represented nothing but her betrayal and her selfishness. She realized that she had taken 17 years of partnership for granted. She had assumed Mark would always be there, that his love was infinite and unconditional, that she could test its boundaries without consequences. She was wrong about everything.
The final reckoning. 6 months later, Sarah received a message from Mark. It came through his lawyer, but his words were unmistakably his own. The divorce was finalized. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided. She had the option to buy him out, but they both knew she would not be able to afford it alone. And she did not want to stay in this house anyway. Not anymore. She packed her belongings into boxes, one by one. Each item she held reminded her of Mark, of their life together, of the woman she had been when he still loved her. The wedding photo from the mantel made her, hands shaping, cry so hard she had to sit down on the floor. The books they had collected together over the years, the kitchen towels she had picked out together, the entire infrastructure of a shared life now being dismantled piece by piece. Sarah moved into a small apartment across town. It was nothing like the house. It was modest and cold, and it matched her internal landscape perfectly. She had tried to contact Mark one last time, not through lawyers, but directly. She wrote him a letter, a real letter on actual paper, because she felt like she owed him that much. She wrote about her selfishness, about how she had mistaken boredom with betrayal, about how she had wanted to feel something alive, when all along she had been slowly killing the most important relationship in her life. She wrote about David and how she realized too late that she had never actually cared about him. She had only cared about the fantasy he represented, the escape from reality that she had constructed in her head. She wrote about Mark and how much she had loved him and how deeply she regretted destroying that love through her own choices. She took responsibility. She did not make excuses. She did not ask for forgiveness because she knew she did not deserve it. She simply told him that she understood now what she had lost and that she would spend the rest of her life wishing she could go back and choose differently. Mark never responded to the letter, but Sarah did not expect him to. The cameras told the truth, and the truth had set them both free from a marriage that had become a lie. Sarah had learned the hardest lesson of her life, that you cannot take love for granted, that attention from someone new is not more valuable than devotion from someone true, that flirtation can cost you everything, and that some mistakes cannot be undone, no matter how much you want them to be. The silence was indeed more painful than any confrontation could have ever been. The danger of taking love for granted. Sarah had 17 years of trust and devotion from Mark, but she slowly began to see his consistency as boring rather than as the precious gift it truly was. We often undervalue the people who show up for us every single day and overvalue the excitement of new attention. We must recognize that genuine love requires active appreciation and cannot be assumed to last forever without nurture. Selfishness destroys more than relationships. Sarah's focus on her own desires and her need for external validation led her to make choices that hurt not only Mark but herself as well. Selfishness is short-sighted. It feels good in the moment, but creates devastation that lasts for years. She lost her marriage, her home, her stability, and her future happiness in pursuit of temporary excitement. Denial is a destructive coping mechanism. Sarah told herself repeatedly that her flirtation was harmless, that nothing serious was happening. She minimized her actions and justified them constantly. But the cameras revealed the truth that she refused to acknowledge to herself. Her denial prevented her from stopping the behavior before it destroyed everything. The moment we start lying to ourselves about our actions is the moment we are truly in danger.